Football, the All-American game, is in fact a Canadian invention. The year was 1874, and the McGill University football team first implemented the modified rules of English rugby in a game with Harvard. The potent offense of today's game was not yet evident, and the game ended 0-0. In 1891, the Canadian Rugby Union was formed, followed by the birth of the Big Four, comprising teams from Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Our modern-day game certainly has no monopoly on competitiveness.
Welcome to the first episode of Daily Fantasy CFL. I am Crazy Gaby, and I am very excited and happy to be joined by John Buffalo 66 Sullivan. You may know John from the early days of Daily Fantasy Sports when he was one of the original high rollers. He, of course, had the Buffalo Challenge that he sent out to anyone willing to take it. And once again, kind of finds himself in the catbird seat as CFL Daily Fantasy is being offered for the first time at DraftKings.com. And John just so happens to be an avid CFL gambler for the last 5 seasons. John, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. I don't know about the catbird seat. It's real close. I can't play DFS in New York right now, so I can see the catbird seat. But
it's right across the border. You can take a trip across the border and sit in it for a minute, but then you got to go back home.
But I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk CFL. I've kind of been clamoring for this for a long time, and now it's finally arrived.
Yeah, and we've talked a great deal about it, so we're going to share some of that with folks. Before we get started, though, I just want to let everyone know this is not technically my home, so to speak. So this is going to be John's show. I'm just going to shut the hell up and fade into the background. And long-term, whether or not it's me asking the questions or someone else, highly recommend that you give John a follow on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em. Or you can give my podcast production company that this is going to be ran through at Fear Beard Media. The company's called Fear the Beard Media. There was no room for the word "the" in the Twitter name, and that way you'll stay updated whenever we release these episodes. We plan on releasing one of them a week, so just want to make sure you know where to get them at. And lastly, you can find it on iTunes, you can find it on Android, Stitcher, Podbean, any other podcasting app that you might use. It's not available right at this moment because it takes a few minutes for iTunes and Android and all those places to actually approve, and this kind of came out of thin air. We didn't really know what DraftKings announcement was going to be, but by the weekend, those should be up for you guys to subscribe to if you want to stay notified that way. Before we talk strategy, though, John, I would like to know, how did you get into CFL? You know, what kind of caused you to become interested? Is it the fact that you are from Buffalo, or is it something else about the game that really drew you to it?
Well, This goes back, it's going to date me a little bit, but it goes back to being a kid. And I grew up in upstate New York. I actually grew up in the Syracuse area. But growing up, I always lived relatively close to Canada. So, you know, with the old-fashioned television and rabbit ears, you know, we could get CBC at our house. And I saw a few games, and I saw a lot of hockey when I was a kid. But I really got hooked on CFL in the early 80s. Again, dating myself, in 81, our family got cable TV for the first time. And some of the original programming on ESPN was Canadian Football League. It was on all the time. And the games were so exciting. And, you know, back in that day, you had your, you know, major television networks had sports. And other than ESPN, there wasn't really any that much sports programming. So I started watching it, and it became appointment television for me because it was just so exciting and high scoring. And, you know, this is before, you know, Joe Montana came on the scene, and this was like the end of the Steel Curtain era in the NFL, and defensive football was king back then, you know.
Yeah.
So the CFL was explosive offensively, and it was a ton of fun to watch.
You know, that's a really good segue into talking a little bit about what makes the CFL different from the NFL, because I, like most people, thought these are just going to be the exact same thing, carbon copy, maybe a few differences around the edges, but, you know, these CFL guys are probably just the hacks that couldn't make it in the NFL, so that's why they had to go up north and get their paycheck that way. Not even close. I did about a half an hour of research, which of course is a cursory amount at best, but I found a ton of differences, and John, that's what I really want you to highlight here for us, is really what are the big changes, not so much from a strategic aspect on the field, but just some of the larger rule changes so people can kind of wrap their head around this different animal that they're dealing with from day one.
Well, there's a couple of different ways to go about talking about that, and let me start with the rules.
Okay.
There's coaching and strategy and all kinds of other things, but the rules of the game are there's some obvious differences, and we'll talk about. I can just list those for you. There's 3 downs to move the chains instead of 4 in American football. There's 12 players on a side instead of 11 players on a side. There's a longer and wider field of play, which means that it's 110 yards from goal line to goal line. Plus, there are 20-yard end zones instead of 10-yard end zones. And the field is wider. I believe it's 65 yards wide as opposed to 53 for NFL. The goalposts are on the goal line. They're actually in the front of the end zone, even though they have the modern curve-shaped goal post, with one, post in the ground. It's still at the front of the goal line. One of the biggest rules in CFL, a lot of people don't pay attention to, is there's no fair catch. Every kick must be returned, and in most circumstances, a kick out of bounds is a penalty. So you have to kick it to the other team and allow them to return it. Another big rule is the 1-yard neutral zone. In American football, the neutral zone is basically the football. Right when they're up at the line of scrimmage, the football separates the offense from the defense. In the CFL, that's totally different. There is a 1 yard. The defense must be 1 yard away from the football, and they cannot be in that neutral zone before the snap of the ball. And the other big rule is multiple men in motion in American football. You can have one man in motion at a time. You could have as many as 6 receivers at once in the CFL, and they can all run in any direction they want behind the line of scrimmage and into the neutral zone before the ball is snapped. And all these rules basically create an up-tempo, passing-oriented game, and that's why it produces so many exciting finishes, because you don't have those extra downs to grind out yardage.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found myself when I was looking into the game, is that everything is predicated around entertainment. The NFL sells itself as an entertainment product, and it is to most extents, but the CFL really just seems optimized for viewers to sort of lock in and just be completely enamored for the entire course of the game.
Well, yeah, it's rarer and rarer that there are. It's definitely a parity league. One reason is 6 of the 9 teams make the playoffs, but it's very rare that a team is so bad. And the last couple of years have been those exceptions, because there was an expansion team that went 2-16, and then last year the Rough Riders, which are the most popular team, they're kind of the Oakland Raiders of the CFL. They were like 4-12, I think, or 4-14. They just had massive injuries, and they just had a bad year. But most of the time, the games are really competitive, and there's a lot of parity in the league, and there's very few games that are, you'd want to turn off before they were over. And DFS is just going to make that even more. I think it's going to be a big hit. I think people are going to tune in for the DFS. They're going to get hooked on the product, and I think it's going to be a big hit for DraftKings as much as I've waited so long for it to happen.
Yeah, two things on that. First of all, I think you just showed your age more with a comment a moment ago than you did earlier when you said they're kind of like the Oakland Raiders of the CFL. I'm not sure anybody here in America would be talking about the Oakland Raiders as the most popular team in the past 10 years, 15 years. I apologize. I feel like I had to throw that out there. And then
I just saw the OJ documentary. I thought I was in the 90s for a second.
Oh yeah, geez, that's. This club does not fit, clearly. Anyway, and the other thing is, I kind of am looking forward to it to have a PGA-like effect, because I think if you ask anybody who has been in the daily fantasy space since the inception of it, football, basketball, and baseball were bound to be hits. But if you had to pick, and ask somebody, what's one sport that you never thought you would be excited about or playing fantasy sports around, that would all of a sudden become like, a appointment playing for you? You would have to make sure you'd set aside time to make rosters and research every week. I think the resounding answer would be PGA. And I think it's because there's just always something going on from 8 in the morning until, whatever time they finish at night, 4 straight days, there's something going on. And I feel like that's going to be on a smaller micro scale how CFL is, and that the games are just so damn exciting, and it goes over the course of the week. I loved how when I looked at the schedule, all the games weren't on the same day, which I thought gave it a lot of lasting value, kind of like PGA.
Yeah, you get entertainment value for your sweat, for your dollar. I got into DFS way back in the day in 2007, and at the beginning, no CFL, and I'd always hoped for it, and I actually started betting CFL because there was no DFS. And I still do that, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. But, not a lot of people seem to bet CFL. And for the better, someone like me who places wagers, that's fine because it keeps the lines from moving. And it makes it easy for me to get the wagers I want when I want to get them. But the thing is, it's the engagement. There's only 9 teams in the league. There used to just be 8. Now there's 9. It's easy to follow. That's 4 games a week. This week it's Thursday, Friday, and 2 on Saturday. If you have late swap, you got plenty of time to change your rosters up if you need to do that. And it's easy to watch 4 games. I know there's some hardcore college guys that watch 4 whole games on a Saturday during college football season. Most people watch 3 NFL games on a Sunday.
Right.
It's so for people. I don't think it's going to take a lot of time out of everybody's week to do the research, but I think they're going to get a lot of enjoyment per week out of playing it.
Let's pivot over to daily fantasy sports now. I know I talked to you a little bit about how we were going to structure this, and before we get into any of the specifics, though, we should probably discuss the scoring on DraftKings specifically, since they're the only ones that are offering it right now. What are your impressions seeing how they're going to be scoring these games and how those actually fit with the rules of CFL being different than the NFL?
Well, I give DraftKings mad props for bringing CFL out into the open, out of the closet, if you will. But it looks like they copied with very minor adjustments their NFL scoring system. And that makes a few things abundantly clear to me, and that is top of the chart is the running backs are way overvalued and the quarterbacks are undervalued. And what I mean by that is the bonuses for a 300-yard game in the CFL for a quarterback is not a difficult task at all. It's kind of an average day, to be honest with you. On the other hand, a 100-yard rushing day in the CFL doesn't happen that often. It does happen from time to time. But most backs that play every down are there because they can catch balls. So, you definitely want, a running back that's going to get short yardage situations, and there's a little more intricacy in short yardage situations, but than just running backs. But the bonus for I think they either should have made the bonus for a quarterback 400 yards instead of 300 yards, because 400-yard games are not that uncommon. Or they should have upped the reward for a 100-yard rushing game and kept the other one at 300. But the other thing that I noticed in the scoring system is the defense and both the offense and the defense, the special teams aspect. And there's no kicker on the roster, and I'm in love with kickers, and I think kicking is such an important part of the game. I will talk more about kicking in the CFL in a little bit, but with the no fair catch rule, every kick's got to be returned, and the kick returners for each team are literally are going to be the MVPs of daily fantasy sports. And if you have a player that returns all the kicks and he gets a regular share of the offense, he is going to be a must-play for you. Also, on the defense, return touchdowns, kick return, punt return touchdowns, count towards your defensive team scoring. So if you feel that somebody is a really strong candidate to score return touchdowns, which happen a little more often than you think in the CFL, you may want to double dip by picking the same team that your kick returner is from. If if he plays for Hamilton Tiger Cats, you may want to pick the Hamilton Tiger Cat defense. And then if he scores a return touchdown, you'll actually get 2 touchdowns out of it. So that's a strategy you might want to. That might be a little more of a GPP strategy, but might be something that you want to consider going forward. I don't think a lot of people are thinking of things in those terms.
Now, can you, with the running back advice you've given, should we be looking then to just roster some punt running backs and load up on other positions, since there's this sort of arbitrage that's created at the beginning that may not exist down the road, and a lot of people maybe are going to try to build more balanced rosters without sort of paying attention to the effect that the CFL specific, basically how often running backs get the ball and get to do well. Do you think that it's really just you should just go balls to the wall on cheap running backs for week 1 and just go all out with the other positions?
Well, the way the roster's set up, it's 1 quarterback. I think 2 quarterbacks would really be better. And then they have a 1 running back, 2 wide receivers, and 2 flex, and the flex can only be wide receiver or running back. So, yes, I would recommend only taking 1 running back and not using flex on running backs.
Okay.
I fiddled with a roster today. Since I can't play DFS this week, I'm actually going to post my roster on my Twitter page tomorrow. So anybody that wants to play and doesn't want to do any research, I'll give you a free roster. Caveat emptor: if you lose, not my fault. But I found, fiddling with the roster today, that I felt like the prices were a little soft. The most expensive, you get 50,000, and there's 7 positions. So that's about 7,000 per. And the most expensive defense is only 5,100. They should have been higher. The most expensive quarterback was pretty expensive, but of the 8 starting quarterbacks, the cheapest was about 8,300. Running backs were fairly cheap, and there's been some talk about maybe our scrub is going to start for one of the teams. The Winnipeg, depending on their running back situation, and he's only 2,500. But I was able to get almost every player I wanted fit into my roster on my first try. I fiddled for about a half an hour or 45 minutes to get the slots I thought were the best matchups. But I think the pricing will get more difficult as the season goes along, and then that's when people are going to find out where the true values lie. And we'll talk about some of the nuances of the game, and then I'll talk about a couple players in particular that I like for this week.
That sounds like a wonderful idea. So we will transition a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole then. And you have listed here 2 specific players that you wanted to talk about. The first one's a quarterback, and then the next one's a wide receiver. Did you want to hit on them right now, or did you want to hit them last? I just want to make sure we go in kind of a direction that makes sense for you.
Okay, well, I can go any direction you want. I can talk about the 2. These are the 2, basically, in my opinion, must-play players for this week. Definitely, if you're doing cash, I would definitely hinge them around other players for GPPs. But the first one is I think these guys are both obviously mispriced. Is Jonathan Jennings for the British Columbia Lions. He's not even 24 years old yet, and he was 3rd string last year. By the way, each CFL team has to dress 3 quarterbacks every week. But he was the 3rd string last year, and because they had injuries, he got to play. And he started for about 7 weeks. He was lights out. He's like 6'3", 6'4". He's mobile. He does their short yardage. He was lights out. He is the starter now, and he got them back into playoff contention last year. He's the lowest priced quarterback this week on DraftKings at 8,300. And they play in the GM Place, which is a retractable roof stadium in Vancouver, and it's going to be climate controlled game, whether it's open or closed. It's a no brainer to start him. He's going to play, pretty much all situations. In Oftentimes in the CFL in short yardage third down situations, they will take out the passing quarterback and bring in a rushing quarterback. But Jennings is going to do both roles for them. So that's why he's attractive, and he can pass and he can run. And I think that's a no-brainer. So the second, I don't think I'm giving away any state secrets here, but the other player that is obviously mispriced is Brandon Banks for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, also known as Speedy B. He is, without question, the best returner in the CFL. He's probably the fastest player in the league. He's rather small. He's only about 5'9" on a good day. But he almost single-handedly won the Grey Cup 2 seasons ago by a return touchdown in the fourth quarter, and then almost a kickoff return touchdown in the fourth quarter, and then almost a punt return touchdown on the last play of the game. And Hamilton lost that game 20-17. But this guy is the best all-around player in the league, and he's only 5,700 on DraftKings. He doesn't get a lot of targets. People always talk about targets. It's totally the wrong way to look at this. He returns every kick, which is very important, but he also gets touches on offense, and a lot of that is by putting him in the backfield and giving him sweeps or giving him screen passes. And so he's going to be low on the target list, but they try to give him the ball as much as possible because he's just an explosive player. So just for the return yardage, I think you get 1 point on offense for every 20 return yards. So just for the return yardage alone, he's going to earn you points. I think if he's healthy and active any week of the season, you have to play him, especially at that price. Now,
so until the market corrects itself, he's a guy you just really need to slot. He's not even someone you can say, I'm going to fade him in a few tournament. Like, he's just such a lock that you should probably have him in every lineup.
I really think he is, and one of the reasons is the number one quarterback for Hamilton is Zach Caleros, and he was on track to be the MVP last year in the league, or he was the best quarterback in the league last year, and he tore up his knee, ACL, MCL, whatever. He's still out. He's not going to be back. They're trying to get him back for the second half of the season. And Hamilton went from the favorite in Vegas, the favorite to win the Grey Cup at that time when he got hurt, to basically not even making the playoffs. So if they struggle on offense, they're going to be, they're going to be getting a lot of kickoffs. They're going to give the ball to their best player, who is Brandon Banks. Whether they have to put him in the backfield, if they're having trouble throwing the ball, he's going to get touches. Whether he gets them on the return yardage or on the offensive game plan, I just think it's going to happen. I don't see how it can't.
All right, let's transition over to the other side of the football and talk about defense, because if people have some sort of nominal idea about who to play on offense, my guess would be they're going to be completely lost when evaluating total defenses, specifically because you just can't go based on any stats really from the previous year. So what are you seeing this year, and should people just be paying up for the best defense like Edmonton, or should they be trying to take a risk on someone that's lower priced?
Well, this is how I feel about defenses. I think all the defenses were underpriced.
Okay.
So you can pretty much pick any one you want, and it's not going to hurt you this week. I still, Edmonton is a defending champion, and I still think that they have the best defense in the league. They had a lot of coaching changes, but they have a very strong defensive line and linebacker core. I think they have the best linebackers in the league. So if you're looking for sacks, if you're looking for turnovers, I think you really can't go wrong with Edmonton. I also think that British Columbia, BC Lions are very underrated on defense. I think they're also very quick. I think they have the best pass rusher in the league myself. You could argue there's a couple of different guys, but as an overall defense, I think BC is very underrated. What I would do early on is I would look at who I think are the biggest question marks on offense, and I would play the defenses that face those teams. And what is obvious to me early on, just looking at the preseason and everything I've seen with the roster changes this year, Montreal and Saskatchewan have the biggest question marks on offense. Saskatchewan has a veteran quarterback named Darian Durant, who's 34 years old, and he has been injured for the last 3 years. But when he has not been injured, he had a season like Henry Burris had last year where he threw for over 4,000 yards and can run the ball. But he's had arm injuries, leg injuries. He missed almost all of last year.
Kind of like a Robert Griffin.
And, yeah, a lot like Robert Griffin. Whether he's going to be able to put together a full season again is a big question mark. And Saskatchewan is basically they had such a horrible year last year, they basically turned over their whole roster. I think they only kept like 15, 17 maybe players from last year. So they're a completely different team. They're a huge question mark. They're off this week, so they're not playing this week. So that's the other team I think is a question mark on offense is Montreal. They have 4 quarterbacks, and they can only dress 3 every week. They have they brought in a veteran who's going to start week 1, Kevin Glenn. I always felt like he threw too many interceptions. They have a couple of really good receivers. The son of Chris Carter from the Vikings, if you remember him, and the Eagles.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, his son, Deron Carter, plays for Montreal. They also have another receiver named Green. I think it's CJ Green. Anyway, they're decent receivers, but there's a lot of questions with the running game, with the offensive line with that team. There could be quarterback controversy. They have Rakeem Cato, who played at Marshall. They have Brandon Bridge, who's a Canadian-born player, and I think he's the future. He's 6'5". He's going to run their short yardage packages, but he can throw the ball too. They just signed Vernon Adams, that used to play at Oregon, and so is that the 4? Those are the 4 that
Yep.
I'm talking about, but. Those 2 teams are question marks. So if you're saying I need a safe defense, I would play a defense playing those 2 teams, especially if that defense was playing at home. The other aspect of defense is the fact that return yards, I'm sorry, not return yards, but return touchdowns,
Right.
also count in defensive scoring. DraftKings gave the offensive players points for scoring the individual return touchdown, and they gave the defensive team the same points for scoring a return touchdown. So you could actually, if you think that one of your return guys that you focused on is going to have a huge day, you can double dip by picking that same defense. And if I take Brandon Banks on offense, I could take Hamilton on defense, and if he scores a touchdown, it's 6 points for both slots in my roster.
Huh.
So,
do you think that's something? Do you think that's something long term that they'll do away with when they kind of do realize the double dipping effect and how it's kind of pushing the casual players down the leaderboard and allowing the savvy players to shoot up the leaderboard?
Well, I think they're going to make adjustments to the scoring over time. This is a work in progress, obviously.
Right. Not if they would have called Buffalo, though, right? If they had called John ahead of time, they probably could have just thrown that out there. That's all.
I've always been available. I do bar mitzvahs too. So
can I say? I know I said I wasn't going to really talk, but I feel too strongly about this. I got to interrupt for just a moment because I'm with you. I think that it's a wonderful thing that they're offering CFL, right? So let's give them all the props in the world. DraftKings has time and time again shown that they're willing to take the initiative, show the ambition to push the envelope and give people new ways to play daily fantasy. So for that, I have nothing but respect. Tip my cap, tip my beard, whatever the hell you want to say. But there is something to be said for doing things right, correctly? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If you're going to do something, and this is personally how I've always felt, if you're going to do it right. And it doesn't seem like it's too much of a stretch to just bring people in who are smart. And it doesn't have to be you. I joked about it being you. It could be anybody. There's plenty of people out there who understand the CFL, who know how the scoring is going to be different than the NFL. And this isn't just CFL. This has been a lot of the other new sports that have sort of been ushered in, and it just feels kind of hastily done in the sense that it would have been easy to just bring a consultant on board, pay a couple people consulting contracts for 2 weeks to tinker around with your scoring and make sure that it actually matches up with the contest that people are playing. I don't know. That's my thought on it.
Well, I mean, it would be great if they, offered me something like that. I will toot my own horn a little bit and say that back in the day, years ago, not in the last 2 or 3 years, but FanDuel did ask me consult on a few items, including their hockey salaries. So I did give input back in the day when I was playing a lot more. But they'll make the adjustments, and all it's going to take is for the fan engagement. Now, they basically, DraftKings is kind of struck a deal with the CFL. And
right.
I always thought this was going to be an amazing fit for fantasy because it fills a void in the fantasy schedule. And
yeah, because nobody wants to play MLB anymore. Just don't. Even the people playing MLB don't want to be playing MLB.
Yeah, it's really it's something different, and people that need to have a Football Jones. It runs every year from around the 20th. The preseason starts a couple weeks earlier. By the way, the CFL gets that right. They run 2 preseason games and 18 regular season games instead of 4 preseason games.
Yeah,
they got that right a long time ago. But from the 20th of June to Thanksgiving weekend in November, it's the same every year. And I'm going to go out on a limb and be very opinionated here and say that the Grey Cup, which is the championship game for the CFL, is a better halftime show than the Super Bowl.
Uh-oh. That's shots fired right there. Roger Goodell is going to be knocking on your door here shortly.
At least from a musical perspective, I believe.
You're gonna have to pull the concussion. What is it? Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
I'm gonna have to claim CTE at some point. But so those are the players that I'm definitely targeting in week 1. I think you got to play those 2 players.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't realize you were still going.
People are trying to, like, I'm going to wager in week 1. I'm not just fiddling with the DFS, but
right.
Since I can wager and I can't play DFS right now, I'm going to make a couple of wagers, a couple of bets. But I notice that people look at the lines, the Vegas lines or whatever you want to call them, to decide, which DFS areas to target. And sports betting and DFS are related, but they're distantly related. I think they're very different skills, but I think they're both skill games.
And now that I've sort of broken away from the big machine, is what I'll call it. I appreciate the freedom of being able to say what I'm about to say. None of us are stupid fucks. If you live in a banned state, just call your friend up who lives in a different state or family member, transfer them the money on PayPal or whatever, and just tell them what lineups you want them to buy in for you. I mean, it's not that difficult. You can still have your sweat. It's not illegal at all, and I don't feel ashamed whatsoever about saying it, because at the end of the day, these dickheads in positions of prominence should be staying out of our personal lives and letting us enjoy our recreation the way we want to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I'm expecting it to, only be a couple of weeks before I can do this in New York again.
Agreed.
So it's not really worth it for me to go through all that rigmarole.
Right.
But the betting odds are, because it's not what the seasoned bettors like to call a liquid market, where you can bet 6 figures on an NFL game. You can bet 50,000 on an NBA game without any problem. You would be hard pressed to get $5K on a CFL side or total. Definitely not a total. But like I said before, I feel like, once people know, they watch the games and they know the players and they know the teams, these wagers are going to be pretty obvious to a lot of people. It's, it'd be interesting to see how it affects the lines and what I look for, how they move. But looking at the first week, I'll talk very quickly about the wagers I like this week. And that's there's on Friday, Montreal's at Winnipeg. And I already told you Montreal, I thought, was a question mark offensively. Winnipeg had a bad year last year, but they lost their quarterback, Drew Willie. And without him, a former University of Buffalo product, I might add. But without him, they couldn't move the ball. So he's healthy and he's back. And they also signed Andrew Harris, who is arguably the best running back in the league, although he is questionable to play Friday. He pulled a hamstring in practice. The Blue Bombers.
Real quick, would you play Andrew Harris if he is in our just tournament only?
Oh no, if he's definitely starting, I would play him in DFS.
Okay.
I think he's the most expensive running back, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's $8,000. If he's starting, not only would I play him in DFS, but I would bet the Blue Bombers. They have a nice home field advantage. Their stadium is new stadium. It's -3. I would take Winnipeg Blue Bombers -3. Even without Harris playing, I think Winnipeg's going to win this game as long as Drew Willie doesn't get hurt, because their backup can't move the ball. So I think the Blue Bombers are going to be an improved team this year. I think they're going to compete for the playoffs, and I think they're going to compete for the West title. And that's the one bet I like. But the bet I like the best this week is the Saturday night 10 o'clock East Coast game. It's actually in Vancouver, but it's 10 o'clock where I live. Calgary, Stampeders, British Columbia Lions. I talked earlier about Jonathan Jennings. And I expect this game to be high scoring. Both of these teams have great offenses. They have great kickers. That's important for the totals. They're playing in a climate-controlled stadium. And it's the over-under is 48, and that's the lowest total on the board of the four games, which really makes me scratch my head. So at 48, that's an over all day, and that's going to be my definite play this week on Saturday night. So I'm going to take over 48 on the Lions and Stamps. But I think that this is all going to be good for everything. If people play DFS and they start watching the games are going to move from being on ESPN3 streaming to ESPN, the network.
Yeah.
And it's going to be good for everybody, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
Is there any sort of comparable package like NFL Sunday Ticket for CFL?
There's not really. The CFL, first of all, the games are never run at the same time. So if there's two games on Saturday, they're smart enough not to run them both at 1 o'clock. There's one at 1 and one at 7, or one at 4, one at 8. So you never have to worry about two games going on at the same time. Also, if you can't watch the games, the CFL website has condensed video of each week's games. In less than 1 hour, you can watch all four games that week, see all the scoring plays, all the turnovers, all the important plays that happen in the drives. It's really easy to keep on top of. It doesn't take a lot of time, and that's what I like about it. It's fun, and it doesn't take up a lot of your time to research.
You're telling me you're not on the Fangraphs equivalent for the CFL, 3 hours a day, breaking down every pitcher?
All I want to know is that somebody is going to play. Now, the rosters, it's a big deal. There's 45, 46 players on a roster. 21 of them have to be Canadian. 7 of the starters have to be Canadian. Players come and go on the rosters. If somebody gets put on the IR, the injured reserve, they have to go on the injured reserve for 6 games.
Oh, wow.
So they don't want to put anybody on injured reserve, but if they may, because of the balances of the roster, they may have to call somebody up. Each team also has one kicker that does both the place kicking and the punting. And it's happened twice last year where that kicker got hurt. Last year for Toronto, in the very first game of the season, Swayze Waters was the special teams player of the year before, injured his groin in the first kick of the season. And they had to have one of their linemen come out and kick the rest of the game and punt and place kick.
What an abomination.
It is. There's no emergency. I mean, whoever's on your team that can do it. So obviously they went for 2 on every touchdown.
Right.
But, they had to find a guy that could punt. And that makes a huge difference in the game. So, knowing the nuances of the game, and we could talk about more in that in the coming weeks or whenever you want, but there's so much detail that people are going to figure out over time. But I feel like I have that edge right now, and it makes me feel a little awful that I can't use it.
Well, you will be able to soon enough, and this seems like a good stopping point. We went a little over the 30 minutes we promised, folks, but you know what? That's some good knowledge right there, so I think people are going to be willing to forgive us for that. Of course, folks can follow you on Twitter at Buffalo Hold'em, spelled exactly like it sounds. And you also had wanted me to mention you have a YouTube page where you posted a CFL handicapping video last year in case you've enticed any of our listeners to give that a shot as well. They can just search Buffalo Hold'em or CFL handicapping on YouTube to find that video. And if I'm not mistaken, since I do know you, I think, pretty well at this point, anybody who wants to ask questions on Twitter and the YouTube comments, any of that sort of thing, you're going to be very good about answering them and having a conversation.
Absolutely. I encourage people to ask me questions. I'll be happy to answer them on the podcast and or just answer them on Twitter. And I always post all my CFL plays, my wagers, on Twitter, usually right after I place them. So other people, and I've kept records for the last 3 years of my CFL wagers, and that's all searchable on my Twitter timeline. So you can search through my Twitter timeline for all my past history and everything.
Yep, advanced Twitter search is a hell of a drug.
Yeah. So anyway, please tune in and fire away if you got questions. I'll be happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening to Daily Fantasy CFL, and we will be back next week with another episode. Take care.
All right.
Thanks for listening. Now, head over to fearthebeardmedia.com and check out all of our digital content. Also, follow us on Twitter and Snapchat at FearBeardMedia. There was no room for the word the. Follow us on Instagram at FearTheBeardMedia, and remember to keep an eye out for those pianos.